Afternoon for those on the East Coast. This is the California College Pathways webinar. This is a case study on how strategic philanthropy leads to system change. This is part of the Excellence in Public Philanthropic Partnerships Exchange. It's a learning opportunity that is being hosted jointly with the Council on Foundations, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and California College Pathways. My name is Peter Gordon. I'm the Associate Director of Government Relations for the Council on Foundations. The Council on Foundations is a national membership organization that represents nearly 700 foundations across the country and internationally. For the past 7 years, we've had a partnership with HUD on the Secretary's Award for Public Philanthropic Partnerships. This has been a great way to highlight the work that philanthropy and government do together in order to better their communities. And as part of that partnership, we earlier this year started the Excellence in Public Philanthropic Partnerships Exchange, which is an online community of practice for the former HUD Award Secretary's Award winners. And this is a place to exchange ideas, information, tools, and resources. So this webinar is part of that. Just quickly for some logistical information, on the control panel, you can see a selection for the handouts. This is where you can download PowerPoint that we'll be using today if you want to print it out and take notes for future reference. There's also some additional handouts, 3 additional handouts that you can use. The first shares additional information on California College Pathways Funders Alliance. The second is the initiative recently released project update. And the third is the initiative's theory of change. So those are also things that you can download during the at any time during the webinar. If you guys have any questions during the webinar, you can use the control panel, and in the chat, you can type in your questions. At the end of the presentations, we're going to have a question and answer section, but feel free to type your questions in whenever you have them during the webinar. If we do not get to your questions during the Q&A session at the end, we will follow up directly via email. Additionally, if you have any technical issues while you're on the webinar, please feel free to use that chat box to let us know. And then finally, the audio recording of this webinar will be posted on the websites listed if you'd like to share the content or listen again at a future time. So I'm very excited to announce a lineup of presenters who will bring an extraordinary amount of knowledge and expertise to this webinar. The first is Janine Balfour, who is with the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. She has been leading foster youth strategic initiative at the Hilton Foundation for the past 8 years, and her work is focused both in Los Angeles County and the city of New York. Yali Lincraft is the Vice President of Philanthropic Services at Whittier Trust, which provides staffing for the Walter S. Johnson Foundation. The mission of the foundation is to provide support for foster youth and other vulnerable youth ages 14 to 24 in Northern California and Nevada to become successful adults. The priority of the foundation includes support for education and jobs training programs. Debbie Raucher is the California College Pathways Director with John Burton Advocates for Youth. She has been with John Burton Advocates for Youth for the past 8 years and manages all aspects of the initiative. Rhonda Moore is the Vice Chancellor of Student Services and Special Programs with the California Community College Chancellor's Office. The California Community College system is the nation's largest provider of workforce training and higher education. And finally, Alexia Everett is a senior program officer with the Stewart Foundation. She has over 15 years of experience in youth serving systems and is one of the founding members of the California College Pathways. Here is just a brief agenda, an overview of the agenda. Janine will begin the webinar with a brief description of the issues that California College Pathways is seeking to address, and will then provide an overview of the CCP's Funders Alliance. From there, Yali will describe the project history and the evolution that has brought it to its current form, including the use of collective impact model to frame the work. After this overview, Debbie will discuss the role that data collection and research has played in the initiative, and Rhonda will share about the role of the public sector in the project and how public resources have been leveraged to support this work. We will close with Alexia sharing some lessons learned from the work, and then we will spend some time responding to your questions. I will now turn it over to Janine Balfour, the Senior Program Officer with the Conrad and the Hilton Foundation.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. So the California College Pathways Initiative emerged from the recognition that transition-age foster youth were experiencing extremely poor educational outcomes at a time when having some form of post-secondary education or training, whether it's vocational training or an associate's degree or a four-year bachelor's degree or beyond, is becoming increasingly necessary. So as you can see from this chart, foster youth consistently express a desire to go to college, with 86% reporting the expectation that they would go to college. However, few actually complete a degree. Data from a 2011 study found that only 8% of foster youth obtained a 2- or a 4-year degree by the age of 26, compared to 47% of the general population. And there are really a number of reasons why we see such poor outcomes. There are factors that can occur early in life, such as the trauma of abuse and neglect, and there's also the impact of family poverty and the instability that is often accompanied by the experience of being in foster care. But there are also key gaps that exist in both the crucial point of transition from high school to college, and then once a student is actually enrolled in college, that can lead to these very poor and low completion rates. So the impetus for this particular initiative also grew from the understanding that education pays off in many ways. The investment one makes to pursue a college education has direct impact in future earnings. So you can see from this chart on the screen that the more education a person has, on average, the more money they make. So when added up over the course of one's lifetime, the difference in earnings can equal several $100,000 or more, actually. So not only do college graduates earn more on average, but they also have greater job stability, and they have lower rates of unemployment. This can be particularly important during hard economic times. So during the most recent recession that began in 2009, the unemployment rate for those without a high school diploma hit 15%, which was 3 times the rate of unemployment for those with a bachelor's degree. A college degree attainment also pays off in other ways as well. Those with a college degree are more likely to experience job satisfaction, they have better health outcomes, and they have lower rates of criminal justice involvement. They're also more likely to be civically engaged in their communities and to vote. In addition, the fastest growing industries are those which require an education beyond high school, such as healthcare, education, and business support services. And on the flip side, there are fewer options for those without a college degree now, and there will be even fewer in the future. Occupations losing the most jobs are clerks, cashiers, telemarketers, packagers, and farmers. So this chart shows how the job market has changed since the Great Recession. You can see that during the recession, there was a huge loss in jobs available to a person with a high school diploma or less. About 5 million jobs were lost, and we have not recovered those jobs, even as the economy as a whole has recovered. There continues to be a net loss of jobs of 5.5 million since 2008. In contrast, the blue line at the top of the chart shows that while there was a slight loss of jobs during the recession for people with a bachelor's degree, in fact, that loss was minimal, and the post-recession years have seen a net gain of 8.6 million jobs that require a bachelor's degree. For those with an associate's degree, the market has fully recovered, and there has been a gain of about 1.3 million jobs. In total, 99% of the jobs created since the Great Recession requires at least some college. So the seed for the California College Pathways was planted in 1998 when the California State University at Fullerton launched their first campus support program that provided services that were targeted specifically for foster youth, known as the Guardian Scholars Program, with initial funding from the Stewart Foundation. And over the next several years, the Stewart Foundation and other funders witnessed Cal State Fullerton's success and provided funding for additional colleges and universities to adopt this particular model. The prevalence of these programs has continued to grow. By 2008, the number had increased to 31 programs with a combined investment from private philanthropy of $4.7 million. So over the past 10 years, the number has grown to 125 programs across the state that provide support that is customized to the needs of current and former foster youth. In 2006, the three public post-secondary education systems in California, which is the California Community College System, the California State University System, and the University of California System, they began looking at how they could better support foster youth at a system level. So in particular, the community college system, which serves the largest number of foster youth in California, developed the Foster Youth Success Initiative, which identified liaisons at each of the systems, then 112 colleges to assist foster youth with financial aid, access, enrollment, and referral to other resources. And then in 2012, in response to both the pressing needs and the growing successes in the field, the Stewart Foundation and Walter S. Johnson Foundation launched the California College Pathways Funders Alliance. These two foundations came together to develop a state-level strategy for improving the outcomes that the state was seeing in educational success. They recruited a number of other funders, including my foundation, the Conrad Hilton Foundation, to join the effort, and the group jointly decided to use the framework known as collective impact to guide the work. The CCP Funders Alliance now consists of 14 philanthropic partners, and we continue to grow. The CCP Funders Alliance is open to all philanthropic organizations interested in partnering around the mission of CCP, California College Pathways. There are no membership dues, and there's no minimum required investment. Current partners include those for whom foster youth educational success is a key aspect of the organization's mission, as well as for those whom this is a part of their larger portfolio. So members range from small family foundations to large corporate philanthropic partners, and the alliance includes regionally based funders, as well as those who invest across California or in multiple states. So the CCP Funders Alliance members come together. We come together quarterly to share information. We identify strategic investment opportunities, and we move the data collection and research agenda of the initiative forward. The Alliance works collaboratively to identify what long-term systemic change looks like within our collective areas of interest, and what key insights and recommendations and new practices can be taken forward to create the change envisioned by the Alliance. Our work together includes three primary activities. First, the Alliance meeting provides opportunities for information sharing regarding new developments in the field and best practice models and investment opportunities. And we often share information with one another and with experts from the field, and they are also invited to share about innovative practices and the latest policy developments. Second, the Alliance creates a forum for identifying strategic opportunities. So the group collaborates to pinpoint prospects for coordinated funding strategies that leverage individual investments to maximize our impact. And then finally, the group is a driving force behind the CCP research agenda. Members review and provide feedback on opportunities for expanding the knowledge base and finding new ways to measure impact and inform policy conversations. The meetings are convened by a backbone organization, which is the John Burton Advocates for Youth, and agendas are developed by them with input from the funders. And members also bring issues to the table that they've identified that could have potential strategic value for our joint efforts. So now I'll turn it over to Yali Lincroft from the Walter Johnson Foundation.
Thanks, Janine. So I want to both talk about this slide, which the numbers are, I'm astonished, and I was involved since the early days, and how leveraging and partnership really pays off. But I also just want to be specific. Today we're hosting this webinar. Many of us, the presenters, are here at the California Wellness Office. And the reason we're at one of our funders' offices is we were originally going to be at the Hilton Foundation, but because of the fires that many of you read about in California and the traffic, it was very difficult for us to meet. And so our funder colleagues kindly let us use their space. And this is just a small example of how the funders, both in monetary ways, are partnering, but also in very practical ways, where we talk to each other, we share proposals together. And this is very much an organic beast of how we can use leveraging our dollars. So in terms of state investments, since the launch of the Founders Alliance in 2012, the state of California has now invested $83.3 million to support the state initiative goals. And the current annual investment is $32.3 million, and that number continues to grow. Again, it's just, I'm wowed by it, and I'm involved. So as previously noted, the effort is really based on a framework of collective impact. During the first year of the effort, we as the Alliance, we examine each element of the collective impact and determine how to apply it within our own work. If you see the 5 elements on the screen, agreeing on the common agenda and then developing a shared measurement and defining a set of activities that build on each other, that's how it becomes mutually reinforcing. And then we do mechanism of continuous communication and working very closely with our backbone organization. For any of you funders who have been involved in Funder Collaborative, this looks all very pretty on the screen, but as you know, the reality of it is each foundation comes with different sets of agenda, priority, geographics. So it took us a while, but it was a lively and appropriate conversation. So that none of us involved with the initiative gives up that priority, which is our focus of our foundation, but we learn from each other how those of us who are involved in one piece can help feed information and co-fund in a way that we lead to the larger goal of together, the 14 Foundation, and very much the state of California. We're moving the ship together. So about collective impact. Jointly in 2012, when we started the Funder Alliance, we created this common agenda, which we called the 4 E's. It's equipped, enroll, earn, and embark. And it's very practical. I mean, there isn't any component of this that doesn't make sense for those who work in social services and higher education. That for a student to succeed, they need to be equipped before they go to school at the K through 12 level with all those tools, the financial aid, social support, et cetera, so that when they enroll in the college, they're in the right program, they are taking the right classes, they're getting the right support, and that they make it to the end line, whether it's 2 years or 4-year degree. And that during that process, at the end of the ship, it's not just getting the degree, but getting the job, the right job, the job they want. And again, this is fluid because as any of you know, working with first-generation students, they may slip, move backward, forward through different parts of it. And it isn't a clean linear line, but it's something that takes sort of a lot of concerted effort and research working together. And there's different entry points for some of us. So some funders may be very interested in sort of the high school track. Others may be very interested in the employment component or during the, the college career stuff, but we get to provide support in our different entry point, while still supporting the overall framework. And then over time, our group has really kind of expanded and revised and worked on different components of these 4 E's. There was more information on the website, but I do know that for any of you, again, who are involved in collective impact and common agenda, it's important that there's sort of a menu of different ideas that funders can get involved with. And that while there's a common goal, if it's too prescriptive, I think it's hard for all of us to completely share with it. But having this menu really lets us all get involved in whatever component fits our foundation's mission. So the second key component of collective impact is shared measurement. How do we know if we're doing well? So prior to CCP, our field did not have a universal set of indicators that could be used to measure progress. And we had to work very closely with the grantee to define what the indicators were, what were crucial to measure, and milestone and intermediate momentum point. That was easier said than done. I mean, again, we've been involved in this game for a while, and I have to tell you, the first couple of years, even just defining who was a foster youth going to college was easier said than done, because different institutions had different definitions. And sometimes it was for financial aid, other times it was for the county. So it's tricky, but in those conversations, a lot of knowledge was gained. But once it was defined, there was a great deal of time then to figure out how to develop those data systems so that the institutions we work with also understood it. And then finally, to then focus on it to really gain resources and support and highlight the best practice. Debbie from John Burton Advocates for Youth will share more information about the data and research shortly, but I have to tell you again, as the funders who were involved at the beginning, there were very strong, very robust conversations about every indicator point, talking with the students, talking with the colleges to get to where we are now. So collective impact, mutually reinforcing activities. So as the work evolved over time, the common agenda has allowed us to stay focused through sort of a set of reinforcing activities we can do both at state and local level. These 5 broad categories are identified, and they're a part of our series of change. So investments could be in programs within college or the K through 12 system, in the public child welfare system, both child welfare and actually the educational system in California, data and research, and then finally the policy advocacy so that they would reinforce each other. I think that's been one of probably the strongest success of this program, is that often as funders, we may fund practice, but it's hard to get that instant feedback loop to Sacramento, to Washington, DC, of when policy change, what does that actually mean for the students on the campus? And it is very powerful when you can go from policy to practice with that immediate of a feedback loop. And this is part of the reason how we were eventually able to get this a very large $20 million annual investment by the state of California, which Rhonda with the California Community College will explain later. Without having that feedback loop, without having that data, I don't think we could have convinced the state of California this was a worthy investment. So collective impact, what does it take? It really requires a lot of engagement, frequent in terms of structured engagement, but also open communications. As Debbie will share, and Janina Hilton, we will have meetings quarterly and we will email each other. And we will talk frankly about situations because it's fluid, and between the meetings, there was definitely a lot of conversations. One of the early activities of CCP was developing a very robust website where we keep regular updates. John Burton's website, JBay, they have a monthly e-newsletter, which I know is not just sent in California, but nationally, thousands receive updates on what's the latest happening with the county, with the state, et cetera. So that really keeps us up to date on what's the latest in field research, tools, FAFSA changes. I mean, it's just really deep in the weeds where it needs to be, and then broader where it also needs to be. We're also very lucky that JBay and the funders are all participating in various consortiums, both at the campus-based or state and federal level. And then finally, it's been valuable because that's how we keep the stakeholders informed. That could be a student who's benefiting from the program, who's willing to testify in Sacramento. That could be a funder who's working with another coalition of funders that want to share the latest happenings with CCP. And then finally, the backbone organization. I think we've just been extremely lucky to have such a skilled organization as John Burton Advocates for Youth working with us. They have a unique blend of not only understanding policy advocacy, but really just understanding the basics of project management And this blending of skills has been really effective combination. We have a full-time project director, Debbie Rauscher, who we'll hear from shortly. And then we also, in Los Angeles County, given how big the county is, have specific staffing that I know the Hilton Foundation has been a very strong supporter. So with that, we'll have Debbie share data.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the information that both Janine and Yali have shared so far. So my name is Debbie Rauscher, and I am with John Burden Advocates for Youth. We are, as has already been said, the backbone organization for California College Pathways. So in terms of the role of data in the initiative, data has played a huge piece in the work that we have done. It's really been essential. And data has played a number of different roles. One, using data and research has allowed us to really better understand the foster youth experience to and through college. And this then leads us to be able to identify systemic barriers and best practices to support this population. So we have been looking at data definitely as not data for data's sake, but to actually really hone in on what are the barriers at a system level to better understand that, and then to take that information and turn it into a policy agenda to remove those barriers and address the needs of foster youth students. The information, of course, is also used to track outcomes and progress of the changes implemented, and that's an ongoing process. The investment in data has really paid off for the initiative, as the information obtained has directly supported our efforts to leverage millions of dollars in public funding to achieve our goals. And Ron is going to talk in a couple of minutes about the specifics of what that has looked like. But, you know, one of the points that I really want to make is that those millions of dollars of leverage that Yali talked about in the beginning of the webinar, that required some pretty significant resources up front. So allocating resources to leverage existing data systems to create tools specific to our target population. These tools now provide an ongoing source of data that can be used, but there definitely was significant time and energy and financial resources that needed to be invested to get us to where we are today. So I'm going to just share really briefly about what our measurement system looks like. So we use a system called CalPass Plus, which is an intersegmental data system that is supported by our community college system that pulls data from early childhood education, K-12 systems, community college, universities, and the labor market in order to track outcomes for the student population across all of these different systems. Now, it's not it doesn't provide student level data. It's an aggregate data system. And so what we were able to do was to work with the community college system, as well as the K-12 system and our university systems, to create an identifier for foster youth, specifically in this system. And that has allowed us to track our specific target population of foster youth. So rather than developing an entirely new data system from scratch, what we were able to do was take an existing data system, figure out how to make some small modifications to it in order to leverage it to track the information that we were interested in tracking. And stakeholders were very actively engaged throughout the process to identify the milestones and momentum points that could be used as standardized outcome measures across the system. So what you see on the screen now is some information about the foster youth data dashboard that was created. So again, we leveraged this existing system that had all of this wealth of information about financial aid access and student outcomes and participation in different kinds of career and technical education programs. And we're able to pull information specifically for foster youth. And then we worked with the organization that manages CalPass Plus to create what's called the Foster Youth Data Dashboard, where we can pull information about the remediation needs of foster youth, financial aid access, enrollment, whether they're participating in on-campus support programs, indicators like GPA and course completion and retention, whether they're participating in career and technical education programs, and ultimately completion numbers. And there's another piece to this tool which is incredibly valuable that we refer to as the cohort tool. And this is functionality that CalPass Plus was able to build in that allows any given campus program to upload a list of students participating in their program into the system, and then it provides back all of these different data points for those individual students at an aggregate level. And so this has allowed us to create a common set of outcome measures for the different programs that get funded, rather than requiring them to manually track all these different outcomes, and one is doing it this way and another one is doing it another way. They're all providing the same exact data. It's all coming from the same source, and they get it at the click of a button. This slide just shows one of the screens from CalPass Plus, just to give you a quick visual of what it looks like. This is one of the screens from the Foster Youth Data Dashboard. So you can see this is the one that's showing grades, the percentage of foster youth who achieved a 2.0 GPA or higher, or a 3.0 GPA or higher, and some other indicators. And you can see the way it's structured is that it shows that information for all foster youth, and then it compares them to the non-foster youth population. So we can track both how things are changing over time for our specific target population, as well as whether we're closing the gap between foster youth and the general student population. So what did all this take? I just want to kind of give a quick summary of what was involved in this effort. So first, collaboration with the public systems to identify foster youth. This was huge. We never could have accomplished it without the partnership with the public systems, in particular the community college system, where we worked with them to create a foster youth identifier within that system. Funding for the data partner to create the dashboard. So the organization that manages CalPass Plus needed some resources to create the foster youth data dashboard once we had the identifier. Widespread stakeholder engagement. We pulled in a lot of different partners to have discussions about what were the indicators that made the most sense for the initiative to be looking at over time. So that definitely was not done in a vacuum, but involved a number of different partners. Partnership with the Backbone organization, my organization, to bring content knowledge to the research. So my organization, JBay, came in with some background and understanding of the foster youth population, and having that expertise at the table to really inform the conversation was really essential. Engagement of stakeholders to ensure data quality. There's been a lot of work done with the folks at the colleges around our foster youth being correctly identified. Is the dashboard providing the information that we think it should be providing, and double checking that, and a lot of back and forth. It's been a very iterative process to get to the point where people feel confident in using the data. Research partners to analyze the data and produce actionable research. So we've engaged with a couple of different organizations who have taken the data and actually translated it into a couple of different reports. The first was a baseline report with some outcome indicators. The second report looked at specifically at the high school to college transition and what were some of the factors that seemed to impact whether students were successful. We have two more reports that are in the works right now that'll be ready in about a year or so, looking more deeply at how the child welfare experience intersects with the college experience. And then finally, an advocacy partner, which is the same as the Backbone organization, my organization, JBay, to turn that research into concrete policy ideas. So again, not just research for the sake of having the research, but to actually make it actionable at a systems level. And Rhonda is going to be sharing a lot more information about what that actually looked like. I'm going to turn it back over to Peter for a minute. Before I do that, I just want to remind folks that you should feel free to send your questions in through the questions panel at any time during the webinar. We'll be doing them at the end, but definitely feel free to go ahead and send them along as you think of them. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Peter.
Thank you, Debbie. So I just wanted to do a quick sort of update on advocacy and lobbying and the differences between the two. And in this slide, this is just showing the spectrum of lobbying and advocacy. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just the different types of things that foundations can engage in when they are looking to discuss their work. So these are just some of the permissible advocacy activities. that foundations can do. This includes educating legislators about foundation issues, communicating with regulatory agencies, participating in litigation, just nonpartisan research and analysis, like what Debbie was talking about just now, providing technical advice, and nonpartisan sort of civic participation, like get out the vote initiatives. In terms of direct lobbying, this is direct communication with a legislator, and I have it listed up there, so I'm not going to read it to you. But this is when you are talking about a specific legislation on a specific bill or piece of legislation. So just for an example, it would be like you talking about how a legislator in DC should vote yes on HR 3, the Higher Education Act reauthorization. Not lobbying is just talking about, in general, about higher education, things that you're doing in the higher education space, saying that you support higher education policy that makes access to college more affordable. So those types of things are not lobbying. And again, this is just laying out what grassroots lobbying is. So this, again, is expressing a specific view on our view on a specific piece of legislation. This includes calls to action when you're urging your members, your funders to contact legislators about a specific piece of legislation, providing your information and a mechanism for whoever the recipient is to directly communicate with their legislators, and identifying who those legislators are. So for an example, going with the same example, this would be telling your networks, your donors, to urge their member of Congress to vote yes on HR 3, the Higher Education Reauthorization Act. What would not constitute lobbying would be just publishing or distributing a report on policy alternatives that make higher education more affordable, as long as it's not in support or opposition to a specific piece of legislation. And I just wanted to touch briefly on private foundations and lobbying. So there are private foundations can make two types of grants to avoid taxable expenditure under the Internal Revenue Code, and that's general support or project-specific support. Private foundations cannot give money to a grantee if they've laid out in the grant proposal that a specific amount of that money will go to lobbying, but a private foundation could give general operating grant or fund a specific project grant up to the amount where lobbying will not be used. And you can see the example on the right side in the blue box about project budget example that would allow a private foundation to fund lobbying. And if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. You can put that in the chat box, or you can reach out to me directly at peter.gordon@cof.org. And now I will turn it over to Rhonda Moore.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to join this webinar. Next slide, Debbie. Thank you. Early on, the partners in this project determined that the California Community College System was a key partner in the effort to improve foster youth educational outcomes. We are the largest system of higher education in the country. We serve over 2.1 million students. We have 115 colleges all across the state, and we have open access. So regardless of income, geography, or performance in high school, we serve 100% of the state's population that's interested in obtaining a higher education. 85% of foster youth who attend college in California are at a community college. There's two more public systems of higher education in California, so some foster youth do enroll at those systems or at private colleges, but by far the community colleges serves the most at over 30,000 students annually, students who have at one point or another been in the foster care system. Next slide, Debbie. Thank you. In the early days of this effort, and we're talking more than a decade ago, individual colleges began developing programs for foster youth with support from private philanthropy. And as was mentioned previously, the Chancellor's Office also began to play a role in supporting foster youth through the identification of foster youth liaisons at each campus. One thing about our system is that our community colleges, 115 colleges, 73 districts are all locally governed districts. So from the state Chancellor's Office level, we have the ability to influence quite a bit, but unless there's legislation, we can't really force colleges to do anything. This early effort, it's important to know that a couple of champions at the Chancellor's Office worked to get the word out to colleges, and on a volunteer basis, they identified foster youth liaisons at all of the colleges, and that was a pretty big, effective effort that happened, like I said, more than a decade ago. As Debbie noted, the Funders Alliance placed a high priority on building the knowledge base about foster youth in higher education through development of original research, the data gathered through feedback from those in the field for those serving in these liaison roles and in other foster youth local programs, along with quantitative research, was then used to inform the development of a policy agenda. The goal of the policy agenda was to institutionalize the programs that CCP funders had funded at the local level. The funders partnered directly with public agencies, such as the community college system, to accomplish this goal. Stakeholders from both the individual campus programs and from our statewide Chancellor's Office continued to play an active role after the development of the agenda by offering feedback on policy proposals and supporting advocacy efforts. As an example of one thing that we've been able to accomplish through this partnership is the creation of the Next Step program. As previously noted, members of the CCP Funders Alliance began investing in campus support programs starting in 1998. The private investment served to not only support the individual foster youth served by programs in any given year, but also began to lay the foundation for building a case for eventual public investment in these programs. Available data pointed to the positive impact that individually tailored campus-based support programs can have on student outcomes for disadvantaged populations. And then CCP was able to serve as a hub for collecting the research that Debbie mentioned earlier and developing a strategy to take the interventions to scale. In 2014-15, the success of this model, along with support from the public sector, led to the creation of a state-funded campus support program for foster youth at community colleges known as Next Up, along with a $15 million annual budget allocation from the state legislature of state general funds. And then from there, the Chancellor's Office collaborated with other CCP partners to set up learning communities to help the initial 26 colleges selected for the program to establish and improve their programs. And the funders provided support to both the CCP backbone organization and the Chancellor's Office through the Chancellor's Office's foundation arm that supported this work also. This past year, the Next Step program was expanded to an additional 15 colleges. So now we have a total of 41 college campuses now offer the program in every region of the state. The annual budget is now $20 million. Will serve about 2,500 students in the current academic year, and is likely to grow from there. At the current funding level, we provide each college a base funding, and then they get about $3,500 per student to implement over and above services directly to those 2,500 plus students. Some additional examples of our public sector improvements is in the system of care for foster youth, pursuing higher education. Several bills have been passed that support foster youth to be better prepared for college. It includes a first ever mandate that assistance be provided with every financial aid and college application through the child welfare system to every foster youth age 16 or older who wants to attend college. Just this past year, a bill was also passed that allows foster youth more time to apply for California's largest financial aid program, the Cal Grant. The Cal Grant program is funded at over $2 billion for all of the systems in California. Knowing that access to financial aid is key to college success, bills were also passed that increased available financial aid. This includes a $7 million annual increase in the Chafee Education and Training Voucher. It's a financial aid source specific to foster youth and provides streamlining of the process to receive federal Pell Grants, as well as that Chafee Grant program. Other policy initiatives were also put in place to support college success. As noted earlier, this included the creation and expansion of a publicly funded campus support program for foster youth at the 41 college campuses. That's Next Up. And beyond that, this also included doubling the length of time a foster youth is eligible for the Cal Grant, California's largest form of financial aid, and expanding access to priority registration for college courses for foster youth. And now state funding. So we talked about this project started over a decade ago, and in 2015 we got the first actual state funding through the collaboration with the Chancellor's Office in this specific project was $15 million for Next Step. Then in 16, another $3 million for the Chafee grant program. 2018, additional $5 million for Next Step, and another $5.3 million for the Cal Grant expansion in 2018, plus $4 million for Chafee expansion. So over the last 3 years, we have a total of $83.3 million in total new public investment that has occurred between 2015 and 2018. This can all be attributed directly to the CCP partners, funding partners that have been involved in this effort, along with our public sector partnerships. And now, thank you for letting me join the webinar. I will turn it over to Alexia Everett from the Stewart Foundation.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues today. We've just shared quite a bit of information with you, so I just thought it would be helpful to take a few minutes to cover some of the key points and then open it up for questions. So when I joined the Stewart Foundation in 2012, the Stewart Foundation, in partnership with Walter S. Johnson, were really leading the California College Pathways Initiative at that point and investing approximately $2 to $5 million annually in the initiative. And as you can see from the last slide and listening to Rhonda, we're now at 83.3 in funding, state funding, since 2015. So we couldn't have done that without expanding partnerships and relationships both with other foundations and partners in the field. At the time in 2012, other foundations were certainly supporting campus programs, so there was a higher level of investment than just what was coming from Stewart or Walter S., but it wasn't an aligned effort, so I think that's really been key to our success. As we mentioned, no shared measures or data collection was happening at that point, but now we have a robust research practice and policy loop that just continues to build and advance significant changes, some of which have led to significant public funding. And then finally, just to think about the arc in terms of campus programming, between 1998 and 2006, private investment supported 32 programs, and then from 2007 to 2012, that grew to 80 programs, and then 2012 to date, we're now at over 120 programs. This just continues to grow, and it's not just about creating new programs, it's about supporting those programs that have been in the field to increase their capacity to support students in foster care and other vulnerable students. Next slide, please. So what are some key lessons learned? I think most importantly, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. California College Pathways was initially seen as a campus support program initiative, but with the 4 E's, as were mentioned, so the frame and the vision for students in foster care completing at rates equal to or greater than the general student population, I think other students and practitioners and policymakers were able to see themselves in this work and how their work connected with others in the field. So I feel like the vision and the frame are essential foundational pieces to this work. And in terms of funder collaboratives, it was previously mentioned that we really wanted to invite everyone to have a seat at the table. So we had responsive grant making, we had strategic grant making, we had regional funders, state funders. So really creating a frame that allows everyone to see themselves as making a meaningful contribution to this effort has been key to our success. And then I think, helping communication, not just among funders, but among our partners in the field, to make sure that they understand all the different things that are happening and how they're contributing to that, how their work contributes to data or policy agenda, et cetera. Another key piece would be the consensus on consistency versus flexibility. So I'm just going to give a shout out really quickly to GrantCraft. So when I joined in 2016 or 2012, GrantCraft had created the nuts and bolts of funder collaboratives, and there's some fantastic questions that funder collaboratives can ask themselves to make sure that they know exactly what it is that in terms of structure, expectations, communications, that they, the decision points that need to be made. Because I think part of this is, each foundation and organization brings, someone mentioned, brings their agenda and their parameters that their organization has to the table. And so it's important to understand how those pieces are going to work together. And are there going to be different, for example, a concrete example would be different levels of funding. That's okay, but you just want to make sure that you go into those conversations understanding, okay, are we going to be funding these certain tactics at different levels? And, making sure that when you make those decisions, you go in with the understanding of why you're choosing to do that. So I think that consensus on what aspects need to be consistent versus flexible is key. So another concrete example would be data collection. We had to, across all of the foundations working with campus support programs, make sure that our grant agreements had the same clear, consistent messaging in terms of what data collection would be expected, and then providing clear information on how that data would be collected and how that data would be used. That had to be consistent in order for us to provide publicly available reports that could inform our policy and advocacy agendas. So other aspects, we were able to be more flexible. Okay, I'll stop there. Next slide, please. So just to say that one of the key decisions that you can make in this type of campaign or initiative is who is going to be the backbone. So initially, the work of developing this sat within the Stewart Foundation. 40% of my role was committed to supporting the sort of design along with the other foundations and partners in the field. And then we collectively made the determination to shift that work to some consultants. And then now, as you know, the JBAY, John Burton Advocates for Youth, is doing a fantastic job with that work. There are many right answers of how to structure this, but just thinking about, whatever your geographic location is and what are the skill sets that you need and what capacity does your partner who's going to be the backbone need, asking yourself some of those key questions I think is really important. I know that Debbie and I, while the in-house, the funder collaborative was more in-house, Debbie and I still were working very closely, and I think that gave us a lot of time to really think about, like, John Burton is known for tremendous advocacy work. What about this data piece? What about some of these other things that they may have not been doing on a consistent basis in the past, but building their capacity to do that? And I think that's another reason why JBAY and the initiative is as strong as it is today. And then finally, I will just say that it's really important to prioritize relationships, recognizing that we all have our own experiences and ideologies, and that's not just across foundations, but also in organizations in the field. That really sometimes the decisions that we might make if it were just our one entity working on something, we really have to pause and take the time to discuss those decisions with our partners. I certainly have taken that to heart, and I think it's made me a better grant maker because of it. I've learned a lot from our partners, both my funding partners as well as those in the field, and have some really deep relationships with folks. And then I would just say, it's really important to celebrate the work as it's happening. This is hard work. It gets messy. It's not perfect. There are times where we forget to loop someone in, or where, understandably, when you're asking campuses to provide data that's going to be publicly available in reports, that can be quite stressful. So you have to celebrate when things are really working, and I think that also helps deepen the relationships to keep people moving forward in a positive direction. So I will stop there, and we can move to the next slide.
So Alexia, were you going to talk about this last piece, or I can go ahead and jump in?
Go ahead.
I think we lost Alexia. So just wanted to say that kind of in terms of next steps for the initiative, this is Debbie with John Burton Advocates for Youth again. The Funders Alliance is now looking at creating a pooled fund. So this would be a fund where the individual funders could put money that would then be distributed to different organizations to achieve the goals of the initiative. It would allow for a more streamlined grant administration for college-based programs, and would just continue to further the alignment of the investments for the different funders. And if any of you out there would be interested in participating in this pool fund or just learning more about it, you can contact me, Debbie Rauscher, and my email address is there on the screen, debbie@jbay.org. I'll also be sending out some information with my contact information after the webinar later on today. And so we are now going to move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. And so thank you to those of you who have already sent in questions. And if those of you out there have additional questions, go ahead and type them into your control panel. So the first question I'm going to go ahead and take, which is how we define foster youth. And so this is a really good question, a very insightful question. And I will say that depending on what aspect of the work you're talking about, the definition might look a little bit different. In terms of the data piece, the way that it's defined is anybody who has been in an out-of-home placement foster care system at any point in their life. So it's the broadest possible definition of foster youth in terms of when people had involvement in the foster youth system. And that is self-reported through the community college application. Now, for some of the legislative work, the definition might be defined a little bit more narrowly. For example, for the Next Up program, in order to participate in the Next Up program, a student has to have been in foster care at some point after the age of 16. So there are some variations with that. The next question I'm going to see if Alexia can take on. Alexia, I'm hoping that your sound is working now. Are you there, Alexia?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, great. So the question is, somebody wants to know, did we have help with setting up the metrics? We indicated it was difficult to get to a common set, wanting to understand how we navigated that process. And I know you talked about this a little bit already, but if you could share a little bit more, you were kind of the one spearheading that piece.
Certainly. So I would say that I had done some work in Washington State prior to coming to California that focused on access and success measures. And so I had a really long menu of measures to choose from. And so then I think it was working, once we knew that we had the foster youth flag in the CalPass Plus system and we knew which campuses that we would be working with, it became a matter of taking this long list of things that might be worth looking at, and then working with so I'll say this, there was the CalPass Plus system, the folks at Ed Results who manage that system for the Chancellor's office, having conversations with them of what they have access to and what they think is meaningful. There were conversations with the community college campuses, which had a specific set of measures, not just with the data folks, but also the campus support staff. So we convened like a mini team of folks so that we wanted to make sure that the measures that we were looking at were useful and helpful to the folks working directly with the students. And I would say we even had focus groups of students and what they thought was meaningful, and would encourage others to consider the same. In all honesty, I think the more difficult work with the measures came to the university segments, which we have the UC and the CSU in California. And so I would say that, and Debbie, you, I believe, were on these calls as well, that was the most challenging, simply because each university has its own data system and may measure certain metrics differently than the other campuses. So we were able to, through patience and perseverance, land on some university measures that everyone could agree to. But that was, 6 to 8 month intensive process, and having a foundation involved in those conversations, I think, was key because there was money attached.
Great, thank you. So the next question is for Peter. Can you clarify, in terms of whether a private foundation can fund lobbying, somebody wants to just clarify, if they give a grant that is general support, do they have to put language in the agreement that prohibits that organization from lobbying, or can they just go ahead and give a general operating grant knowing that the organization does do lobbying?
Thanks, Debbie. Great question. So private foundations can give general operating grants to nonprofits that lobby, as long as in that grant agreement there's not specific language that would direct some of that funding to go towards lobbying purposes.
Great, thank you. Another question, somebody wants to know if we can give an example of how the research work ended up being directly related to the policy work. So I'm going to go ahead and answer that question. So I think the example that comes to mind most obviously to me is that in the initial research project we did, one of the data points that we discovered was that foster youth, only about half of foster youth were getting the federal Pell Grant, the biggest form of federal financial aid, and about 85% of those same youth were getting our local fee waiver program at the community colleges, and the income criteria for those two sources of aid are largely the same. So we recognized that there was this big gap in the number of youth getting the federal Pell Grant, which is over $6,000 now if you're attending full time. And so this has led us to do a number of different bills related to this, in particular focused on improving the rates of completion of the financial aid application, which can be very complicated for students. So for example, foster youth, they don't have to report income from their parents. They get what's called independent status, but a lot of times they have a really hard time verifying that they were in foster care. So we did a bill that set up an automatic verification system for foster youth when they fill out the FAFSA, the financial aid application, to make it easier for them so that they don't get stuck on that hurdle. We also passed another bill, or another component, actually the same bill, that requires our local child welfare agencies to identify in the case plan of any youth who is 16 years or older who is going to be supporting that young person with financial aid applications. We identified that there was a big gap there. There was nobody on whose plate it was squarely put that they were supposed to be providing that support. And so we worked with the child welfare organizations, agencies to make sure that there was a person identified to assist with that. Again, all of this came directly out of the data work that we did discovering this big gap in financial aid. And I think Yali is going to add some to that as well.
And if I could say that the legacy of the research stretched beyond California. So just recently, last month, the Nevada Board of Regents passed a tuition-free waiver for foster youth. And in the bill, it included a component that as part of the tuition waiver, that the child welfare agency has to work with the youth on filling out their FAFSA and federal grant. And that was directly because the data in California found there was money left at the table. And that this would, and all the research also shows that the student with the most robust financial aid is most likely to persist. And then there were small things that funders can do. They may not seem like a big deal, but it works. We did a campaign where the different counties competed with each other to fill out the most of these applications, and the winner got a big fat check and got money that basically paid for pizza and very small items. It wasn't, if you're a county worker, you know that discretionary dollars are very difficult and celebrations are hard. And getting a big fat check in celebration of something you've done that's positive instead of all the negative article stories about child welfare is rare. So this is something funders can do, and it's such a low cost for such a huge payoff. And we think of the millions of dollars that the youth were able to access through financial aid as a result of this. I think it just shows the power of leveraging and working together.
So the next question, Alexia, I'm going to put to you. So the question is if we can talk about how the theory of change was designed and what roles the various collaborative partners played in deciding what goes into that. And I know Alexia was, again, you know, the sort of one of the founding mothers of California College Pathways, and was involved in the very, very early days in putting together the common agenda and all of that. So Alexia, do you want to kind of speak to what that looked like back then?
Sure. So, and I think it also continues to evolve. So that's something that that I want to highlight, that it continues to evolve based on what the need is. I want to give credit where credit was due. Before I joined the foundation, Terry Cook, who at the time was leading the child welfare department at the foundation, she is the one who initially had started the campus support program funding, and I think early on learned that if we wanted to spread and have more supports available to foster youth throughout the state, that we were really going to have to think differently, because it was a significant amount of funding going into developing each individual program. So she began to codify the model along with many. and then decided, okay, well, maybe we could move faster if we started supporting campus networks, where you bring an experienced campus together with some more emerging campus support programs to expedite their development. So I think that was a real critical piece in having that foresight. And so as we were thinking about spreading the programming, we were also thinking bigger, and we knew that there were other folks out there who were supporting this work in some way or another, but that we needed some way to sort of unify that work. And so that's where the vision and the frame really come into play. I think my recommendation for those who are thinking about theories of change and then subsequently theories of action would be, you need to have the practice piece, the research piece, and the policy piece. And that's fair. Those pieces being in play and being solid and consistently funding those pieces over time is what keeps things growing and building on the progress. And so that then allows us to say, okay, well, so campus support programming is going strong. What are some of these other aspects, like maybe preparing young people in high school? What's happening at the high school level? And so we're able to then shift some funding or add funding, supplement to support students in high school as they transition. So I think a key piece in this is you need those pieces, the practice, policy, and research, and then you need, someone mentioned earlier that we meet several times a year. You need opportunities to learn together and to think about what you're learning, reflecting on what's happening, and then looking forward at what are the potential opportunities ahead.
Great, thank you. So the next question I'm going to address to Janine. So the question is about how we recruit funders to join the initiative, and what was appealing for example to the Hilton Foundation, and what drew them to participating in this initiative.
Yeah, great. So again, Janine Balfour from the Conrad Hilton Foundation, and our focus, as particularly when we were beginning to hear about the work of California College Pathways, was really looking at the high school to college link. So we were more interested in having, ensuring that young transition age foster youth were ready, college ready. And so we were doing a lot of investment in middle school and high school. We still continue to do a lot of investment in middle school and high school. And so I came late to the California College Pathways group of funders, and really initially began as a kind of an observer, and then as I was becoming more engaged in meetings and in conversations and phone calls, I was understanding the impact that this group was having, not just on influencing policy, but on leveraging dollars. And that was a huge motivator for me to be thinking about, well, maybe we should also be looking at joining this group and thinking about how we can invest in the college component as well. So really it's a matter of, for me, and I think for many of you who do grant making, looking at how your dollars can be leveraged, what the leadership looks like, and what the backbone looks like. And if you feel confident in the leadership, and that was really what rang true to me for this collective impact effort.
Great, thank you. So there's one other question that came in about what is on our upcoming policy agenda. And so the next thing that we're really looking to tackle is the issue of housing, which here in California is a big challenge. We have a homelessness crisis, and among foster youth even more so. And so we're going to be working with the legislature over the coming year on the issue of housing and how we can expand opportunities for foster youth to be able to access safe and affordable housing while they are in school, as well as other students who experience homelessness as well. So that's the next real big issue on our agenda. And then I'm going to close with a question to Peter, which is, can you provide a little bit more information about the 2019 HUD Secretary Awards and what that process looks like?
Absolutely. And again, thank you, Debbie, and everybody else who spoke today. This great project was one of the winners of the 2018 HUD Secretary's Award, and we had a great time honoring them in DC earlier this year, where Secretary Carson came and gave some remarks, and we were able to have some peer networking and sort of professional development engagement after the award ceremony. Be on the lookout for the nominations application for the 2019 HUD Secretary's Awards that should be coming out at the end of this month or the beginning of December, and will be due sometime, I think around mid-February. So you have a little bit of time to get those applications in. And the winners will be honored at the Council on Foundations Leading Together 2019 conference, which is in Miami this year. And we will have some HUD representation there and potentially another professional development opportunity. But again, this was a great chance to showcase the Excellence in Public Philanthropic Partnerships exchange, which all the HUD Award winners are invited to take place in, and we wanted to sort of open that up to a larger audience so you can get a taste of it, but also learn about a great project that we were really impressed with at the Council and at HUD.
Great. So I'm going to just close with some thank yous. Huge thank you to all of our panelists today for the great information. I do also want to say thank you to the California Wellness Foundation. As Yali mentioned, we had to do a quick change of venue because of the fires here in the Los Angeles area. So we really appreciate their stepping in and providing us with office space. Again, you do have my contact information there on the last slide. I will leave the webinar open for a couple of more minutes for those of you who want to download the handouts that are still available. We will also be sending out follow-up information with a link to the recording to everybody who participated in today's webinar. And so with that, thank you all very much for being here.